every week at the same time on Thursday. And we're planning to do some more next time as well. So of course, if you're interested in this discussion, please attend future events. And also please get more involved in What Marks Society. Today we're going to be talking about Brexit, of course. So Brexit was obviously quite controversial because obviously there were sides for leaving, of course, in terms of European democratic structure, of course the economic forces, the economic interests that drove Europe, whether they were necessarily in the interests of the British people, or the working class, for example. There are also arguments against leaving the EU, of course, which is furthering right-wing nationalism in Britain, for example, furthering the interests of nationalist capitalists. Again, we've seen a rise in hate crime and racism, for example, which we're quite concerned with. So, obviously Thomas is going to give a discussion on the Marxist take on this, of course, how Marxists see this debate. How Marxists see this debate is not really a debate framed for the working class, but framed for divisions amongst the capitalist class, in which the capitalist class have co-opted the working class to approve of their decisions. So I'll leave the discussion to Thomas. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Wait, do we have a live stream going?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's cool. Thank you to everyone joining us on Facebook. Or watching this in a later recording. So this talk is entitled, I've got 49 problems with Article 50.1, which is slightly misleading, as I'll go and show that Article 50 is a huge problem, perhaps not for the working class, perhaps not for Marxists, but for the British establishment as a whole. It is one of the greatest crises which has actually hit them for a very long time. At least probably not something like this hasn't happened, at least probably 1979, around that period of the winter of discontent and all the strifes going on. And we live in a really interesting time to actually see all the events taking part. We know that, for example, within 2 weeks, Article 50 will be triggered, as Theresa May has basically sent her career on saying that we will trigger Article 50 before the end of March. We're actually hoping that this would be the day as a kind of semi-bet to do this talk. Didn't particularly pan out, and the term's slightly too short to delay it. But, I mean, this is the type of times we're living in. And what will that mean? That will mean we will be, within 2 years, Britain will have to leave the European Union, one of its biggest markets, and one of what I will argue will actually be one of the strongest groups of international capitalists working today. It will place Britain in a hugely economic, precarious position. It will, and will effectively lead to a situation where British politics is completely unstable. The last 30 years have seen what's called the Great Moderation. We now live in a time of complete crisis where just change is the continued order of the day. So, I'm going to keep doing this now. So this is effectively the position she's in, to trigger or not to trigger. And what we see is that despite Theresa May's great claim of Brexit means Brexit, or Brexit is despite talks of a hard Brexit or soft Brexit, there's a red, white or blue Brexit, she's effectively given two options. It's either going to be soft Brexit, by which she means she retains access to the open market, or it's going to be a hard one, where that access is cut off, and one of Britain's largest trading partners, one of the international capitalist largest trading groups, and many of Britain's exports go to, will be cut off. But of course this comes with many difficult problems, and very difficult things of which Theresa May is going to have to navigate. So for example, if she does say access to win the open market, she will very likely infuriate many of the Tory voters, and many of, let's say, the UKIP brigade, who have voted for Brexit on the basis of curbing immigration, or basis of getting out of the controls and regulations of the EU. Within staying in the open market, Britain actually comes in a far less powerful position on all terms, where it is still at the mercy of the EU by all its rules, regulations and things like that, but it's actually far less in a situation to actually make those rules. To quote a Norwegian conceptori, actually, if you want to run Europe, you must be in Europe. If you want to be run by Europe, feel free to join Norway, who is in the economic free trade area. And effectively, this puts her in a very difficult position. Suppose she goes against Brexit, then she loses the markets, she loses many of the big business backers who back the Conservative government. And she's also in a position where the British economy is in a very, very perilous state, as British finance markets, which are heavily dependent on on having this open access, this passport, would be in a very difficult position. But this is isn't anything particularly new. There you go, how do you like your Brexit? Kind of nice picture from The Economist there. Apparently I was told this doesn't count as being memes in the presentation, which doesn't mean I'm like down hip with it. It gives you a kind of idea of what they're going for. There we go. But this isn't anything you're going to hear particularly from. You could basically just Google this stuff. What actually then is the Marxist position on it? Where do we lie in the decision of hard Brexit, soft Brexit, red, white, or blue Brexit? Where do we lie in the position of what is our position towards the European Union as a whole, and what does this mean for capitalism? And these are some of the really interesting issues which are very often neglected in this debate and discussion, which we hear a lot about. And to really explore this, I believe we first actually have to delve into what is the nature of the European Union. Now, the European Union was initially founded as the coal and steel community, which was effectively a cartel. For those of you who are sure or don't have to study economics like I do and live a lovely life I can only imagine of, or you don't have to worry about these things. Basically, a cartel is where a group of capitalist corporations, capitalist businesses, agree to fix output, fix prices, fix their regulations, how much they're going to produce, wages they're going to pay, and all of this, to effectively maximise their profits. It's basically a monopoly between many capitalists. It's, let's say, I can't outcompete Barnaby, Barnaby can't outcompete me, so we'll basically just agree to do the exact same thing. Problem with cartels, unless they're enforced in some way, they do become very difficult to maintain because it's effectively just game theory. It's always in the best position for the other person to stab them in the back. So what the European Coal and Steel community was, is they actually effectively wrote this into law. It created the institutions around this to avoid capitalists trying to stab each other over to come worse off. And they made huge profits for this. Now, similar is true for European Common Agricultural Policy. Basically the exact same thing with farming, the farming cartel. But to do this requires fixed prices across countries. And whilst in the 1950s, when this was formed, this was achieved by a Bretton Woods system. This system will later come into problems and start to break down, causing immense problems, immense woe for the European capitalists, eating into their profits and eating into their powerless capitalist class. This is why you really need a clicker.
Do you want me to do this?
Yeah, okay. I'll give you a point. So one of the ideas here then becomes, and one of the essential struggles within Europe and the real move of the European Union to what we know it is today, is this idea of, as you can see, an common currency, or what should be a common currency. And effectively, how when each of these countries having different currencies, how do you effectively stabilise this system to allow the cartels to profit? Now, capitalists were in a bit of a bind in this one, because on the one hand, if you're a capitalist, you want to have control over your currency. You can do nice things like get out of recession, stop the working class from rising up, produce more profit, stab over capitalists by lowering the price of your exports, put tariffs up, etc. like that. On the other hand, it ruins the cartels. And so there was always this bit that they weren't ever going to go directly into a common currency, or at least not immediately, but still did want to see have their currencies relatively stable. They didn't want one day for the franc to the Deutschmark to be, let's say, 1 to 1, the next day be 10 to 1, as that would wipe out the profits made by these European cartels, made by these European businesses, effectively make the European profits for European capitalists far, far weaker. And so they go through a series of many different attempts to basically stabilise the system. So initially Bretton Woods is, if you know much about the history of the world economy, you basically have the Bretton Woods system. It's effectively like a gold standard. Everything's backed by the US. The US, every currency is pegged to the US at a certain rate, and the US dollar is pegged to gold. This collapses in 1971 for a really interesting set of reasons, which will be explored, which leads directly actually to the fall of the post-war boom and the rise of neoliberalism. So come back the next term to find out about that. But then we also then see numerous types. So they had the snake, which is basically they say your currencies will only move within a certain amount of each other. This completely breaks down. They then have the EMS, which then later adopts into the euro. Hit the screen. created real antagonisms between both German and French capitalists. For whilst many of them were benefiting from, let's say, being part of these cartels, the coal and steel, the agricultural, many of the other German and French capitalists, especially the political class, found themselves in a very difficult position. Because whilst you had these effectively relatively fixed exchange rates, you had a problem. And to kind of implement this problem, let's call myself Germany and Barnaby France over here with his little goatee. And let's say, I'm Germany, I'm producing all these cars, etc. And Barnaby's France, and he keeps buying them. Because he keeps buying all my exports, it means that effectively his currency, there becomes more and more of his currency in the market. Effectively the price of his currency, because there's more and more of it, decreases and it goes down. But if the price goes down far too much, it means that he won't be able to, the current price of currency starts moving, the exchange rate starts moving. Bad for the, I thought a bit patronised it, that was weird. This is very bad for the capitalist economies as we've established. And so, effectively, to do this, they need people to go and buy loads of these French francs going about. And to do this, Barnaby raises interest rates. This attracts loads of foreign capital. Huge amounts comes over to get these interest rates, because it now means you're making a higher return if you're big investment bankers, if you're a big monopoly, banks able to effectively invest in France. Look, his interest rates have gone from 2% of, if I have £100, I make £2 back, to 30%, which are levels that these policies reach. You suddenly make £30 back, or more likely, 30 million or 300 million or 3 billion in the amounts these capitalists deal with. But if you raise your own interest rates, what inevitably happens is you effectively end up crushing your own economies, because now effectively capitalists within the French economy are now having to pay 30% interest rates to anyone who lends them money. If, let's say, Marta is a French capitalist, she was initially having to pay 2% for her loans. Now she's having to pay 30%. Her profits are being completely drained, and the economy goes into recession. Did lead to the EMS or the ERS, which was the ERM, which was part of the EMS, being coined the Eternal Recession Mechanism. And so this effectively kept on destroying the French economy. And this, it meant a situation where French capitalists were getting very much more annoyed, or French politicians were getting incredibly annoyed. And whilst, let's say again, these cartels were benefiting, many of the other situations weren't. So France effectively devises a plan in which, okay, we can't abandon the cartels, we have to keep this current currency. They effectively come out as a plan to create an economic and political union, or administrative union, where France would be in control and would suddenly gain the power over the German banks and would be able to effectively set their own inflation interest rates without having to destroy their economy, but without falling out of, without the exchange rates going up, and being able to keep these cartels going. And this plan effectively is the fundamental reason why we have the Eurozone today. It led to a whole things of quite boring and complicated monetary mechanisms. I mean, if we want, we can go into more detail, but I'm starting to find some of this stuff a bit dull and technical. But it led to a whole sway of different mechanisms. You get the EMS and stuff like that. Things called the glide path, whole different types of things. With the attempt that France would manage as the French capitalists to effectively have a European Union based in Paris, ran by French bureaucrats, ran with French administration, and effectively politically dominated by France. They used the example that Germany would be the horses, France would be the carriage. Or, to basically put it more eloquently of how this was, Charles de Gaulle described it basically in creating this union, because this was planned all the way back in the 50s in many respects. That had been an idea being thrown around by French capitalists. This would be war by other means. And when actually the Maastricht Treaty, which basically created the European Union to where it is today, more or less, came into being, a French newspaper declared, this is our Versailles, but without a war. And this, I think, really is a point really to highlight on, and why I've gone through all this boring economic stuff, to really come out to it. Despite many claims, the EU has never been something about peace. It's never been something about trying to bring everyone together in, a whole united humanity across Europe. Look at this continent spread by years and years of fighting, of imperialist powers going up against each other. Now we're all going to come together, we're going to sing Beethoven's Ninth. It's all going to be great. Instead, actually, the history of the EU shows continually this was an attempt by different capitalist class to screw each other over. For French to screw German capitalists, for German capitalists to screw French capitalists, with all of the rest of Europe going on there. Reasons why many Southern Europeans joined the euro was in part due to at least their ruling classes effectively seeing that they'd be stronger if they could rely on French and German support, French and German bourgeois support. Similarly for Greece, which plays out excellently. Would the Greece capitalist class on their own have been able to crush Syriza, been able to crush the Greek economy and Greek workers if they didn't have the entire European Union backing them? And then again, you also see similar lines of why Eastern Europe, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, joined. But also, again, and this is why I call it on the road to nowhere, and I realise I've also may have to speed up a bit as we haven't really covered anything about Brexit yet, it's also designed in such a way that, this again isn't even a mutual meeting between capitalists. It's something where Germany, and to a lesser extent France, and now very much a lesser extent France, or if we can even go further, just bourgeois capital, has complete power over these countries. There is no way an economy can ever leave the euro under capitalism. That is just not possible. Basically, to illustrate why, so let's say if, again, we give the example of Greece in 2016, or 2015, they were like, yeah, Greece, we could leave the euro, etc., and we could bring back the drachma, our own currency, the Greek currency. Well, let's imagine if you did that. Effectively, everyone knows that if you brought back the drachma, the price would fall down immediately, just because, in the same way, when Brexit left, the pound slided immediately. Fair enough, that currency, big currency falls do happen daily. The thing is, you'd be announcing it, the actual ability to bring back the drachma, just the administrative powers of it, would take about 6 months. You'd be announcing a huge devaluation 6 months in advance. If I suddenly tell you, in 6 months' time, if you keep the money in this bank, it's going to be swapped for drachma, which is going to be worth 50% less. Well, what are you immediately going to do, especially when you have free flight of capital, free flight of goods? You're going to immediately take all your money out, stash it in France, stash it under your bed covers, etc. And you'd see a capital flight quicker than you could ever imagine, completely annihilating any economy which tried to do it. Which does leave many problems, which will, and kind of temperamental situation we see in Europe. Continue. Yeah, and this is what I mean. This is Lenin defined. Imperialism is a bit of a buzzword, gets thrown along. But what did Lenin define imperialism as? Imperialism, high-stage capitalism. He defined it as monopoly capital, effectively exporting its power over the world. It wasn't a military thing where people come in with tanks and planes and guns, etc., and say, you are now our country. It's all to do with the economics. It's when a foreign capitalist have complete control over a country. And this is effectively what the French and German people were trying to do, trying to divide up each other's countries, trying to divide up Europe for their own capitalist ambition. Again, and just to really run this point home, consider that the four EU freedoms are never something such as, freedom or liberty, equality, fraternity, or something like that, which at least sounds pretty nice. It's freedom of goods, labour, capital. And there's another one which I've kind of forgotten. But yeah. This is just how much it is. But let's continue. We should also bear in mind that this has actually bit home to bite them very much, and bit home to bite them in Europe in a very, very bad way. In the sense that many people have actually got sick of European capital's domination, their complete disregard for national working classes. And you see this in the populist movements rising up all across Europe, Five Star, Le Pen, Syriza, Podemos, and then to some extent you could argue UKIP and things like that, and maybe the other one was just lost in the Netherlands. People are incredibly discontented. But this brings us to the question of, and starting to hone in actually what this discussion is about. What was the position of the UK in Europe, specifically the Tories? And the Tories have consistently found themselves as a divided, on the right wing in Britain, the bourgeois in Britain, have continually seen themselves as very, very divided on the issue. Really ever since about, probably actually ever since 1974, you could probably see divisions there. On the one hand, many see it as wanting to integrate more with Europe, improve trade relations, gain access to the open market, etc., just be more capitalist, have the power of the French capitalists, the German capitalists. So any time the British working class rise up, you can easily smash them. On the other hand, you see that part of them are actually, let's say, very wary. They see the Europe's going up in flames, they want to get out. Some of them are just anti-migrant, and some of them want to, let's say, boost export and do trade with somewhere else. So this kind of being the division. It's usually very much on, if any of you remember him, this guy was called David Cameron. He was relatively important for a few years. This guy is ex-future Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And yeah, again, and this kind of shows, I mean, the pro-European side of the Tory party was very much in the dominated seat. But this was definitely a minority which was there. Hit the slide. I couldn't really find anything to put the left up. And the left is historically been against the EU on the basis that it's imperialist, it's effectively as we've just, all the arguments just gone through above. It's relatively acceleration, let's say if you destroy the EU, you destroy capitalism, you come across some people there. The EU was going to survive anyway. But many people actually, and quite correctly so, point out that it has actually achieved better working rights in Britain. I mean, this argument is quite flawed, as you basically then just have to ignore Greece. And many of its opponents are actually very right-wing, and we shouldn't really give in to that. However, it is worth, and this is really a common point on just my own position, and if you read Social Steel, newspaper's position on the EU, that the left was completely marginalised in the debate in the Brexit referendum. I mean, some people talked of a left exit, or a left in, or just a left doing anything. It was completely marginalised in this debate, primarily because this was all about capitalist interests to begin with. Whether effectively you have European imperialism, in Lenin's sense, or British imperialism, in Lenin's sense, and to some extent you could probably argue just to a traditional sense as well. And this kind of laid the conclusion that actually neither side in the Brexit referendum did offer any escape for the working class whatsoever, which is why I'd argue neither side is particularly supportable. And I'll come to actually why I would argue for it at the end. Next slide. Okay, I've been talking for about 20 minutes. So, yeah. So anyway, so that was all in the past. Then, suddenly everything changes. This result comes out of nowhere. People are like, whoa, really didn't see that one happening. That was a real shocker. Yeah. Few people predicted that. I mean, in our current perspective, it seems, almost trivial. Brexit didn't mean anything. We then got Trump in the White House and kind of, who knows what's next. Maybe aliens will just come down. But this was, a real, shock to the British working class. And I'm sure, I'm going to assume that, most people, have some memory of, how 8 months ago and, kind of the disasters which broke up. You saw David Cameron leave. You saw, Scotland effectively we're going to declare another independence. You saw the Tory party actually almost very close to a split. I'd say actually, if Andrea Leadsom had come to power, again, Andrea Leadsom was a woman who was famous for 3 minutes on, she looked really important, but then wasn't. A bit like Flappy Bird in the Apps realm, really is that type of style. But if she had come to power, you could have actually seen an active split within the Tory party on the basis that Andrea Leadsom was very much pushing this minority wing of the Tories with actually a real hard Brexit from the European Union. In fact, even if one of their actual on the inside had come in, you could probably see some of the thing. What instead we did have take power was Theresa May. And Theresa May has done an excellent job, hit next slide, of stabilising everything. She basically, in many respects, you could say Theresa May made sure that despite all the threats about the collapse of the economy, Theresa May kind of stabilised it all, because no one really knows, actually, even now, there's still a pretty strong argument to say most people don't really know if she's actually going to go hard Brexit or soft Brexit. And again, she's just for a red, white and blue Brexit, or Brexit means Brexit. And it's kind of a slightly ludicrous position. But this kind of uncertainty has actually managed the UK economy to stay relatively afloat despite many of the big drops that were predicted. There were most economists thought this time would be in a recession. However, because businesses have effectively many have drawn the conclusion that they think Theresa May will go and support them, whilst many that's effectively kept consumer spending high. That's kept the businesses not leaving and not doing the exodus. Consumer spending has actually remained far higher than most economists predicted, mainly because Brexiteers were happy that they won, and Remain voters were like, probably won't happen. Or even if they were, actually didn't seem to. Most people thought Brexit something vague and well off, and didn't actually see anything going on there. So consumer spending was a lot higher. Businesses believed that at May, and there was also a huge push to massively loosen credit to make sure that it's really profitable to invest in Britain. And actually what's happened is there's now actual fears that they've kind of gone too far, and there's now been a massive increase in debt, both in the private sector and in ordinary people in Britain. Hit the next slide, man. Yeah, and then as I was saying, everything else. So Scotland suddenly decides, goes down the path of William Wallace, and again, I think that's picking up there, and it's a very interesting discussion. Northern Ireland decided to slightly implode, and it created a historical election earlier this month where the Unionists for the first time lost their majority, and then Labour Party decided to declare a huge civil war back on, and then just basically fade into oblivion, sadly. Again, really interesting question. That's not really respective of full analysis of the Labour Party, but I think we can all agree they went into quite a major crisis afterwards. There we go. What next? So I think this is the important question we want to really get at. Is okay, what from a Marxist analysis? What from the can we actually start to gauge? What do we believe is next for Britain? Where do we think Britain is going? Where is capitalism at? So what we have is a situation where effectively, Theresa May is going to have to choose between hard Brexit or soft Brexit. Well, can go next slide. There we go. Yeah, May must choose. There we go. And that's kind of pretty representative of the choice she has in front of her and the ride that the British establishment have found themselves in such a situation to put forward. As soon as it becomes clear that May will choose one side of either keeping migrants keeping migrants in and staying within the European open market in some way or another, or keeping migrants out and not staying in the European in the market, she'll either alienate the big businesses and will cause an economic crisis in that sense, or she'll alienate most of her voters, both politically backed. Furthermore, and also I think people, why do I think that, let's say, there's no way of kind of reconciling them? Why is it that she cannot, let's say, kick migrants out and also stay within the free market? And actually the reason is that if we remember all the way back to that side of, Europe in flames, well, what would happen if Theresa May was suddenly given a deal by the Eurozone, by the ECB, by the Euro, all of these institutions there that said, you know what, you've got a good point here, have all the open market trade, have all those nice things, but and also, you can keep control of your borders. Well, then immediately, Le Pen would say, we must have a referendum. Five Star Movement would instantly say, we must have a referendum on the European Union. The right-wing populists in the Netherlands would immediately say, the AFD, Alternative for Deutschland, would immediately say, and effectively every country in Europe, every right-wing nationalist party in Europe, and also some of the left-wing ones as well, would effectively immediately call for a referendum, because as soon as you give it to Britain, you open the door out, and the entire European Union would disintegrate in within months in this situation. And again, this is something which a huge amount of political and economic capital on the part of the ruling class has gone into. They've tried to build up this system, build up this union for their own benefit, for those profits, which they're very unlikely to give away, especially on the forces that will unleash as effectively the political class will lose complete control of the continent. So, well, which Brexit then is best if she can't, get a medium Brexit? Well, again, so I've gone through these arguments, Okay, she'll heavily alienate her voters, but she'll have the big bank, she'll have all people happy, economy won't be too bad. It will fail to stop the very forces which created Brexit in the first place. The very sense of, of effectively, anger from the working classes, from the masses, at the current situation, at the current system. Again, this is, to keep in mind of why these things were triggered. The huge amount of austerity the Tory government has taken us under, the poor perspectives of economic growth, the poor amount of wages going on, etc., just poor living standards generally. All of these forces will continue to create anger and movements such as Corbyn, such as Brexit. They may not be the same things, but these will continue to happen. In fact, as long as we live under capitalism, and until these antagonisms are reconciled, this will continue to happen. It will also fail to stop disintegration of the European Union, which is driven by the exact same forces. It isn't just Brexit and Trump just magically coincided with the planets alliance. It's because of the complete failure of capitalism in the last 8 years to grow. I could talk for a lot longer, but it's a bit boring. Suppose she goes with a hard Brexit. Well, there you go. Big business will ban her, the main parties of that side. And there could well possibly be an attempt to create, let's say, some type of third party, when Labour looked like it could go heavily to the left, and actually succeed in going heavily to the left, and when Tories looked like they could actually go down the Leadsom route, there was a huge talk in the bourgeois press about maybe we could boost the Lib Dems up. Maybe we could create, let's say, we get like the Remain Tories, and we get like the Blairites, and we all have like a big hug. We say, sorry for going against you a few election guys, but when it comes down to it, we're all capitalists. And let's have our own thing going on there. Genuinely a possibility. But very, very difficult to tell in, all of the factors going on. And it could be saved a bit by European collapse, in this sense that actually hard Brexit doesn't matter too much. But that would be really quite, you don't notice, the kitchen's on fire because a nuclear bomb's just gone off type of thing. Speaking in that sense, it would be far worse. Next slide. Actually, go back slide.
Back slide.
It's just back. There we go. That's a bit spoiling at the end. But I think ultimately, it's very difficult to predict what will happen, but I think it's worth highlighting. None of this is a stable situation. Theresa May, Prime Minister, stewardship of the economy will likely end with her either being ousted or a huge electoral defeat. Nothing here is stable. The Labour Party and the Tories are both on very, very politically thin ice, and the economy as a whole will continue to recreate these problems. There is no stability to be found. If what we've been through in the last 3 months has actually probably been the relative quiet before the storm. A picture that of Theresa May going up before the big waves start crashing in. That was by the Economist, and these aren't revolutionaries. They're socialist revolutionaries. They're very much more for keeping the centre ground type of idea. And their effective argument is okay, we've actually had a lull in the past couple of months. It hasn't been as bad as we thought, but it's going to get far, far worse, guys. Hold into your seats. It's going to go downhill. And this is many of the analysis and our analysis is. So how do we actually combat it? If being out of the European Union won't do, being in the European Union won't do, what we need is, and I'm coming to the end, the final slide, a socialist United States. In effect, the argument is that these aren't caused by any particulars of the capitalist system. These aren't caused by simply the indecision of David Cameron or his poor decisions there, or these aren't caused by a specific form of capitalism, but they are instead caused by a fundamental nature, a capitalism system which will continue to throw up social crisis, which continues to create political crisis, and which continues to create all of these things. There is no in or out, is effectively socialism. And that is what we should have to aim for. We have to create a movement all across Europe, all across the European Union, all across the world, actively arguing for these ideals, where we get rid of